For today's review, we are looking at the Overtkill MegaFig from the Spawn line. And the reason why I chose this figure in particular for today's review is because he's a good example of what a monster looks like. I mean, look at him. He has a hideous face, he's an amalgamation of cybernetic and organic parts, and I think it just works for what a monster looks like. And with that said, let's dive into today's review. And of course, since this is a MegaFig, there are no accessories included with this figure unless you want to count the figure stand, but that is always given with every Spawn figure and even DC Multiverse figures. So yeah, it's just a normal practice with Mcfarlane toys. So yeah, I don't ever count those. And let's just jump into the aesthetics now. So right off the bat, in terms of the sculpt work of this figure, I think it's pretty good in that sense. Like, I think they did a good job with most of the details in some areas, but there are certain problems with this figure that also exist when it comes to the overall paint and also the quality of this figure. And I want to start with those bad things first before I get to the things that I do like. And this is a good segue into the first topic I want to talk about, which is quality. Because this figure, one of my biggest issues that I have with it is the fact that the plastic quality is not great. Now, I did not pay full price for this figure. I waited for this figure to go down to like $10, which it did, and that was when I finally bought it. But imagine if you were paying $50 for this figure. You did not know that the plastic quality for this figure was going to be cheap, hollow, and just feels like a fast release of a figure. You're paying $50 hoping for a good quality figure that has this heftiness to it, has a good amount of weight to the plastic. That's what you're going in for when you're buying a MegaFig like this. That was how it was with Cygor. Cygor had its problems, but when it came to the plastic quality, that thing is like a brick. It has weight, which is great, right? Even if it can't really pose well. Before this guy, he does not have any weight at all. You can say he has a little bit of weight because his arms at least have plastic molded into it. But when the chest area, this main torso area, lacks that sort of quality and it's just hollow plastic made in such a cheap fashion, that's where the value of this figure goes down. It's like, are you paying $50 for a good quality product here? No, you're not. And that's something that I don't like right off the bat. And I want to call this out because we've seen this so many times whenever they release figures at this fast rate. And if you are a collector of DC Multiverse, you would know because, you look at that line, so many of the figures come out at such a fast rate, which, it's good on one hand because you don't have to wait like a year. You don't have to wait for like 6-7 months. You can just get it like next month, right? Like, that's good for collecting. But it also exposes a big problem, and that is also the quality of the figure, which we have seen certain figures turn out to be disappointments. What I'm trying to point at here is that this is not a good thing, right? I think the fast rate releases with Mcfarlane toys has both a good and a bad effect with their products. Now, in terms of paint quality, that's another area that gets affected by fast rate releases, is because it doesn't allow the figure to bake longer in the oven, so certain parts of the figure in terms of the paint detail just get left in this sort of state that doesn't look good. And then you have to go back and paint it yourself. And not all of us are customizers. Not everyone has time to customize their figure and do a DIY to fix those problems. Especially when you're paying $50 for an action figure, you would hope that that $50 action figure would be at least good quality with some good paints. Now, I'm not expecting the paint quality to be the best thing on earth, but it has to be at least doable for a $50 figure. And when you look at Overtkill here, he's missing some paint apps in areas that could just be painted much better than what we got. So these are like the key things that I want to point out first that I dislike about this figure because, it's there, right? And as a reviewer, I gotta be critical with this. So when it comes to the overall sculpting of this figure, I still think they did a pretty good job in most of the sculpting of the details that are present on the figure. So let's start with his head sculpt first. in terms of the hideous monster sort of look, they did a pretty good job here. His face is pretty messed up from whatever he is, and you can see his teeth is like all rotted and stuff. Like he's, just angry. Like, does he even have a mind of his own? I'm not too sure. And that's what I like about the head sculpt of this figure, is that it does capture that terrifying nature of what a monster looks like. I mean, if you saw this in real life, you would freaking run, right? I mean, I would run. So, yeah, I think they did a good job with the overall head sculpt. But as you can see, with the paint details on his torso, right, the skin tone could have used a black wash to give it that sort of tone. And what I'm talking about is that if you see how certain figures are painted when they're actually painted nicely, there is a wash to some areas to kind of give this sort of contrast in color. But as you can see with his torso, because everything is the same painted color and there's no wash to it, it just looks too clean. It doesn't look like there's any shadow linings in some areas, and that's just not great. But when you look at his head sculpt, there is a little bit of a wash to it. So you can tell that if they had more time to actually like flush out the paint details of this figure, it would actually look good. So that's one thing I want to point out. And then when you look at this area right here with these little like details that are like embedded into his chest, what about a metallic sort of yellow or gold that they could have painted? These are definitely some sort of like coil or, metal parts that are like just jammed into his chest for whatever's powering him. They could have painted this a lot better, right? Same thing with this area down here with his, pants or whatever he's wearing, right? So these are little paint details that could have been done better. I am glad that when it comes to the silver parts of this figure, like these parts that are sculpted here, and even the parts that are present on the head sculpt, and also these areas right here, it is at least painted in this sort of metallic silver paint, which, it is there. It is visible, as you can see. It's not this dull plastic gray that we see sometimes with certain figures where, they're not using the metallic paint. And, at least this is painted nicely. But of course, if you want to make this stand out more, you can add more to those areas. So at least they did a good job there. But, still, there's a lot of paint apps that are missing on the torso. And when we get to the arms and the legs of this figure, this is where it feels finished and unfinished. And the reason why I say this is because when you look at like the cybernetic parts, right, that are sculpted, there is a wash on it. There is a pretty nice wash to give it this sort of rusted feel, which I don't know if my camera is doing a good job capturing that sort of paint detail, but it's there. It kind of looks like it's there. But of course, you can probably use a lot more to give it a standout sort of look, but you can see that there is a wash applied to it, right? So it looks like it's finished, but when you get to his armor pieces, these don't look finished to me. They look like they could have used another layer of green paint to give it a more darker fade. And even though there is a little bit of a wash on these armor pieces, which I don't think my camera is going to show, but I do see some of it present on some of the armor parts, it's not enough to give it that sort of finished look. So this is one of the things I don't like about this, is that you have this sort of incompleteness sort of vibe, and you have this sort of finished vibe as well. It's like a half and half right here, right? And this is just my opinion. I'm just being critical in this sense. Now, if you like the way that this figure looks, cool. But for me, it's just something that I feel like they could have just given this figure more time. So, but let's talk about the aesthetics that I do like here. So when it comes to all these sculpted parts, I really love all these details that you can see, right? Everything that's present, it's nicely sculpted. There's so much details there. And I think the sculptor for this figure did a really good job in that sense. And you can see that same sort of thing on this side with this arm, right? And his hands are opened, so you can see the details of his fingers, which is pretty cool. And then you also have this armor on this side here with this sort of like, I don't know what this is. Reminds me of Batman, right? With his sort of like sharp stuff on his gauntlet. So you do have these little things that are detailed. And I'm pretty sure this should have been like some sort of metallic gold or yellow. And then when you get to his shoulders, this is where there's a little bit of a wash. And again, I don't know if you can see it, but there is a wash on the overall surface of the paint here to give this sort of rusted feeling. That's what they were trying to go for, but it just feels like the coating of this green paint hides most of it when you're not looking at it. So there's that. And then when you look at the bottom of his legs, you see more of these details right here. Let's look at the backside because it shows more of the details. It really does give me these vibes of like really old character designs, because if you look back to how they used to draw cyborgs, especially the cybernetic parts of the character's design, they used to go crazy with these details, right? Like all these parts and everything to make it look like a cyborg, and that is what I'm seeing on this figure, which is what I like about it aesthetically, is the fact that most of those details are there, even for his feet, right? And, you know, we can talk about the cake rating later, which he does not really have a cake, but you get my point, right? Like, in terms of the overall sculpting of this guy, the details are there, but the paint, it just feels unfinished in some areas. And those are the areas that I think are unfinished, right? The armor pieces, the torso, like it just needs a little bit more of this sort of paint over it. Oh, also these yellow parts. I don't want to leave those out, but you get my point. So yeah, with that said, let's move on to the articulation of this figure, which the articulation for this guy is okay. Let's just put it that way. So let's start with his head sculpt. So he can turn his head like this, as you can see, right, left and right. He can twist his head like this as well, which is kind of strange. He can lean down, not really looking down completely, but yeah, you can get him to look down if you also lean his torso forward a little bit like that. You can also get him to look up. Not exactly the best because he does have this sort of hunchbackness on the back. So there is his head sculpt. For his arms, because the arms are kind of different, right? Like this side has this shoulder piece. This side will have more freedom to be able to lift his arms upward like this. And you can also swing his arms back and forth with no problems. He also has a single jointed in the articulation right there. And because he doesn't have a bicep cut, he has a rotation down here to make up for it. And then for his hands, he does have wrist articulation. He also has a swivel right there. So that's the articulation with that arm. For this arm, it's mostly the same, but the problem here is that because you have the shoulder piece, you're not really going to be able to lift this arm up as high as you want it to be, because this is going to run into his top part of his shoulder and his neck. So not great, but you can get this arm to rotate 360 if you kind of just move that piece out of the way. So that still works. So there is that. And for the articulation of his torso, you can lean forward a little bit, so he can crunch forward, ab crunch forward. You can also lean back a little bit, not the best. But when it comes to rotation, look at this guy. He's just rotating like a helicopter. What the heck is going on here? Like, why is it so loose? But yeah, it's really loose for some reason. So there's that. And then for his legs, he can kick up this high because this part is a soft plastic for the waist. He does have articulation in the legs. He also has a swivel down here for this joint, which is surprising. So there's that. He has articulation in the feet and rocking side to side. No toe articulation, which is really strange. And then for the upper thighs here, there is not much of a rotation. And in terms of doing the splits, he can kind of split out his legs pretty decent. So yeah, that's about it for his articulation. It's very simple, but you can get him into some action poses, I suppose. Not the best, but there he is. There's Overtkill. And now it's time we do some comparisons. I'm going to move him to the side right here so we can fit in frame. Let's bring in some figures to have him next to. So since he is a Spawn figure, let's put him next to Spawn himself. And in terms of scale here, I think this is pretty good because he is supposed to be bigger than Spawn, right? So I love the fact that he is taller. So that's that comparison. Here he is next to the Deviant, one of the more recent Spawn figures that we have gotten. Not bad. And here he is next to a DC Multiverse MegaFig. And since I talked about Frankenstein last year, and I felt that Mr. Overtkill kind of reminds me a little bit of the whole Frankenstein sort of thing, being an amalgamation of parts, well, we got to have them next to each other. And honestly, I love the fact that they're both towering in size, right? And we could throw Spawn in the middle here. And there is the comparisons for today's review. And if you found today's review of Overtkill informative, do give this video a like. If you want to subscribe to the channel for more action figure content and whatever else I do on here, it would be much appreciated. And with that said, take care, and I will see you in the next video.